just turned the recording on. And if you're worried about privacy, nobody's name is going to show up on the recording. These are going to be recorded and will be available on YouTube the day after each class. The recording will be up. So if you miss a class, have to leave early, etc., if people are in different time zones, you'll be able to catch the rest of the teaching on YouTube. And I'll put the link for that on the same place where the handouts are. So I also want to share my screen to show a map. This map may be hard to see if you're on a small screen, but it's also on the web page with the handouts. This is a map of the migration of Buddhism from very northern India, actually what's now Nepal is where the Buddha was born and mostly taught in this orange area. And you can see, maybe not on this scale, but you can see that the Theravada teachings went, of course, to Sri Lanka and then up to Burma and Thailand and Laos, Southeast Asia. The northern Mahayana teachings went up through Tibet into Mongolia, across China, and then into Japan. And then mixed teachings also went down all the way into Indonesia and out to the Philippines. So that took about 500 years. And now, of course, it's spread to Europe and the West. So part of the migration required the Dharma to adapt to the different cultures. It also adapted to different times. So because it took 500 years or more, cultures changed and the times changed, society changed. And what began as largely a monastic tradition became one also for lay, and now primarily lay people. And Buddhists since then have classified the different traditions. They include Theravada, which is basically Vipassana, what we call Vipassana. And the Mahayana, which includes Tibetan and Zen and Pure Land. The Tibetan tradition itself, which a lot of us are trained in, divides it into three: Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. And then there was elaboration and evolution of philosophical views that people developed in order to actually work through the implications of what it means not to have a solid self the way it appears, what it means if everything is impermanent, what it means if our own actions and our own perceptions are what cause suffering. So the Madhyamaka and Yogacara and all the different philosophical views developed along with these traditions. And I don't want to go too much into the history or geography of it, but again, to realize that the traditions aren't arbitrary, that they evolved out of the Buddha's original vision and teaching, and that everything he taught was taken into all the different traditions, but the way they saw it, the way they interpreted it, the way they integrated it into their culture is going to be really different. And that's why it matters. And this continues to the day. When Buddhism went from India to Tibet, Tibet was a pagan, magical, shamanic culture. And so that was integrated into Buddhism, which is why you have all the deities and the spirits and the energy practices and the almost sorcery of Vajrayana. It was because Tibet was a shamanic culture. And so if Buddhism was going to take root there, it had to be integrated with the culture. And we do the same thing now. We're integrating psychology and modern science, theoretical physics. Some people say it's watering down the Dharma, or that it's changing the Dharma from what it was. But the Dharma was never one particular thing, and everywhere it's gone, it's had to find a way to get into that culture. And of course, ours is modern, scientific, psychological. And so it has to happen. It's a good thing. But again, we have to understand what the essential teachings are and understand why that evolution takes place and how to make use of it. So another map is the traditions today. Almost gone from India, except something that happened in the 1950s. Ambedkar was an untouchable in the untouchable class. And because the Hindu class, in his view, was just keeping the castes in place, he invited several 100,000 untouchables, joined him, and took refuge in the Buddha. So here's the Dalit Buddhism that began just a few generations ago. Along the India-Nepal border is a mix of Theravada and Mahayana. In Tibet, we have mostly Mahayana. And China, we have the Eastern, Pure Land, and Zen, the green and yellow, etc. So that's kind of a modern map of where the different traditions sit today. And the last thing I wanted to throw up on the screen, which again, you probably can't see very well, but it's in your handouts and maybe you've even printed them. We have the Theravada, Mahayana, Zen, Pure Land, Nichiren, Vajrayana, somewhat arbitrary, but kind of about as simple as you could make it, the basic different traditions and what the basis is, and what the teachings and main teachings and practices in that tradition are, and what the main texts are, and the countries where those traditions and some of the primary founders and philosophers, writers. So again, not just for the sport of it, to try to study that or memorize it, but to recall some of the details that we're going to go through and be able to put them in place and to see them side by side. So it's an open question whether the different traditions and different paths and different practices lead to a different place. Some argue that there are different paths, and so there's different results, and we have to pick a path and stay on it. Makes some sense. Some say it doesn't really matter which path we take, and nowadays we have choice, right? We could practice in Zen or Vajrayana or Vipassana, Not always would you have those choices, but you do now. Some people say it doesn't matter which one you take the one you like or the one that you can relate to. They all end up in the same place. That was also adopted by the Rimé non-sectarian tradition in Tibet. They said, stay with your path, doesn't matter, we'll all end up with enlightenment, Buddhist enlightenment. And some say you take a path that's suitable for your time, for your place, for your personality, for your proclivities. The problem with that one, of course, is that we are often not a very good judge of what our personality or proclivities or needs are. But still, even in the 400s, so 5th century, Buddhaghosa wrote a big 1,500-page encyclopedia of Buddhist practice. And in there, he's got personality types and the different practices that are suitable for them. So it was intended for a monk or a teacher to be able to kind of diagnose people. There's 84,000 teachings because there's 84,000 diseases. And so that typology exists, whether it's useful or not, it's, you could make some use of it, but for instance, he says greedy people should do one kind of practice, and aversive people should do another one, and people that are prone to confusion should do a third kind. But of course, we all have greed and aversion and confusion. So if you look at it as a pharmacy, 84,000 medicines in the pharmacy, you don't just go into the pharmacy and start taking medicine. You have to take the right one. And if you take the wrong one, it may do some serious damage. So the typologies make a little bit of sense. Others say that Pure Land and Zen is practiced side by side in China, always has been. And some say if you the thing with Pure Land is that meditation, practice, purification, etc., isn't really possible. We are so confused and so such slaves to our passions that the only thing that will really work is faith and accepting, opening to what is. And then you'll realize that the entire universe is made of universal compassion, but that you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That also makes a little bit of sense, but the Theravada and the Zen and some other traditions are very self-powered, right? We have to use discipline and effort and purify ourselves. Some people say, if you start out with that, it's like a snake going into a bamboo tube. If you go in the self-power end, you'll have to come out the other powered end. And if you do it the other way and just have pure faith, but no discipline, and you won't practice, etc., that might get you into the tube, but at some point you're going to have to make some effort and make some intentions and carry them out. And others, like the Chinese, have no problem practicing multiple paths. And so people that say you should only study Zen if you're a Zen student, don't learn anything about the others, don't get confused, just stay with your path. The Chinese would never do that. The Chinese practice Zen and Pure Land together, so discipline and faith, alternately, or even, every day. Some discipline, some faith. And in fact, the Chinese throw in some Confucian teachings and some Taoist teachings, Taoism for the body and Confucius for society and Buddhism for the mind. And they've maintained these traditions side by side, somewhat synthesized and integrated, and for several thousand years. So it's an open question. The assumption here is that we are going to study the other traditions, whether you find them useful in your actual practice, whether you remember any of this a year later, is up to you, and what use you can make of it. But we're going to assume that even if you're not going to dabble or practice in another tradition, it might be helpful to learn about it. I was raised Episcopalian, practically Catholic if you're Episcopalian. And once I fell in love with Tibetan Buddhism, I began to wonder if the foreign language, which was Latin, I don't understand Tibetan language. So when I hear Tibetan chanting, I might as well be hearing Latin chanting. But the Episcopalians and the Tibetans have incense and candles and singing, beautiful kind of otherworldly music, a lot of prayers and devotion. And so as a Tibetan Buddhist, I can benefit by recalling my upbringing in the Episcopal Church. I don't get them confused, but certainly some of the earliest memories and some of the fondness and some of the mystery comes from understanding the other traditions. So just checking the time. Let's dive into the Four Noble Truths. The first teaching that the Buddha gave after he woke up included the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, and they remain the center of all the traditions. Again, how they're interpreted and how they're practiced differs, but the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path are both at the center of any Buddha Dharma. The Four Noble Truths are dukkha, samudaya, nirodha, and marga. And I'm not throwing the Sanskrit out for fun, but there is no English word that corresponds to these four. So they're worth considering. So the actual, the literal, this is dissatisfaction. There is dissatisfaction. That's the first noble truth. There is dukkha. And dukkha is not just pain or suffering or anxiety or unhappiness. It's all of those, but it's also existential angst. It's also the grief of losing things that you hold dear. It's the anger against encountering things that you don't want. It's the bittersweet dissatisfaction of enjoying, say, a sunset or a love relationship. And even at the time, you realize it's not going to last. So it's a bittersweetness. Dukkha includes all of those. Maybe the best word is dissatisfaction. But I will often refer to it just as dukkha, because it's not just like, I'm dissatisfied with chocolate ice cream, I want vanilla ice cream. Dukkha is any kind of dissatisfaction, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. The second noble truth is samudaya, is origin. This is the origin of dukkha. So we have dukkha, and then we have the origin of dukkha. The third noble truth is nirodha, which is, this is the end of dissatisfaction. Nirodha means end, like blowing out a candle. It also means containing dukkha. And David Brazier's got an interesting book, The Feeling Buddha, where he goes back and looks at the etymology of the word nirodha. And he says, I think I'm going to go with containment, because I don't see an end to suffering anywhere. But suffering can be contained like a fire can be contained, and it can be used. In any case, the third noble truth is usually translated as this is the end, the end of dukkha is possible. And then the fourth noble truth is marga, or the path to the end of dukkha. The cause of dukkha, the cause of dissatisfaction, is a shorthand, is called tanha. Tanha is usually translated as craving. So you could almost say the Four Noble Truths is an addiction model. Suffering arises, the cause is craving. But tanha, craving, is shorthand for all of the poisons: greed, hatred, ignorance, jealousy, pride, all 84,000. The confusion that is at the heart of all those reactions and emotions. So tanha isn't just craving, and that's clear. Anger and confusion, ignorance, jealousy, pride, all of those cause suffering. Tanha literally means thirst, and it works. The Buddha was not sloppy with words. He used tanha because it actually means thirst, the kind of thirst that when you're so thirsty, you'll drink something salty. Problem being, of course, the more you drink, the thirstier you are. So you can see how the craving, the tanha, comes from confusion. You think if you drink the seawater, it will quench your thirst, but you're confused. It will make the craving worse. So tanha is not only the craving that causes suffering, tanha is the increased thirst. It's what ties us to the suffering. So drinking this salty water because you're thirsty is the perfect word, because it describes the futility of samsara. Samsara is not this world with a lot of suffering in it. Samsara is the confusion and the suffering that comes out of it. And it's a futile, cyclical, circular phenomena, which is why it's so hard to get out of. There's also noble truths in Western language. Sounds like it's a philosophical thing. We're looking for the truth, and if we figure it out, we're done. But actually, the Four Noble Truths are 4 tasks. And this was described in the earliest sutras as well. We have to understand the first, which is that there is dukkha. Dukkha arises. We have to understand that. We have to abandon the origin of dissatisfaction, which is that craving and confusion. We have to realize, make happen the cessation of the dissatisfaction. And we have to cultivate the path, because that's the only way to bring that dissatisfaction to an end. So we understand dukkha, we abandon the tanha, we realize the cessation, and we cultivate the path. So we're not looking for a philosophical truth. We're trying to bring dissatisfaction to an end. all the philosophy, the traditions, the practices, the views, even the philosophical debates should be about bringing an end to our own and others' suffering. Jamgon Kongtrul was a great 19th century Tibetan master, and he is responsible for putting down on paper all of the many lineages throughout Tibet, most of which had never been written down, or if they had, there was only like a copy or two or something by the different teachers in the traditions. Kongtrul brought them all together and put them all in something that would take 5 or 10 feet of shelf space in a modern book. And he completed that in the 1880s and 90s, right before the British invaded Tibet and basically destroyed a lot of the monasteries and the written records, and everything, culture, it changed. So Kongtrul's got a special place in the hearts of Tibetan Buddhists. He is also the teacher of Norbu Rinpoche, who was the tailor in Kongtrul's monastery. Norbu was his heart disciple, whose heart disciple was Kala Rinpoche, who was the teacher of Michael Conklin and Lama Lekshe. So we're actually not too far off from, you go back however many generations that is, 4 or 5 generations. Kongtrul is our great grandfather, something like that. Anyway, he said, if stubborn habits of attachment and aversion are not reversed, then meditation is as meaningless as a gopher hibernating in a hole. And I have that tacked on my wall, and I try to look at that every time I sit down to meditation in case I get seduced by the calm or caught up in the effort, or sit there and think instead of actually meditating. I remember that the purpose of all this is to reverse the stubborn habits of attachment and aversion and the confusion upon which the attachment and aversion feed. So the next thing I'd like to look at is the Eightfold Path. There's 8 pieces to it, and they can basically be broken into 3 sections. One section is the view, sometimes called wisdom. The second is ethics or action. And the third is meditation, sometimes called concentration, but you'll hear me rant about concentration probably next class. I prefer to think of it as meditation because there's more than concentration to meditation. So wisdom, ethics, and meditation. And the handout that I gave you, I think I failed to put the at least two suttas, the Buddha's teachings, written teachings on that handout, but I can share it with you. Right from the beginning, he didn't just say, you should be wise, you should be ethical, you should meditate. He's got very specific definitions of what those are and what they entail. The first of the 8 is right view. Some people say, well, that's just an Asian thing, or that's just a bad translation. It can't be right view, like right or wrong, but I beg to differ, and so did the Buddha. The actual word, samyak, in Sanskrit, actually means right as opposed to wrong. So right view is that you understand the Four Noble Truths. You know there is suffering. You know its cause is craving and confusion. You know it can come to an end, and you know the path that takes you to the end. That's the right view. Wrong view would be to not believe you have anything to do with your suffering. Somebody or something is making you suffer. It has no reason. There's no way out. But despair, for instance, is a wrong view because it assumes that it just happens to you and there's nothing you can do about it. So the right view is to understand, accept, see the reality of the Four Noble Truths. Right view also means that you see that all things have three characteristics. They are impermanent. They are interdependent. They're dependent on causes and conditions. And the third one is that everything, every experience, every phenomena is ultimately unsatisfying, if only because it comes to an end. So there's no key to permanent happiness and pleasure. All things have those three characteristics or marks, and that'll be one of the things we look at next week, kind of tease that apart. And the third piece of the right view is that is the truth of karma, the reality of karma. Actions evolve into results, including the experience of the actor. Everything you do has a result. If you read about meditation, but you don't practice it, you won't get the result of meditation. If you plant an acorn, you'll get an oak tree, not a pine tree. So action and result. Things are not chaotic. Things don't happen for no reason. Just because you don't know the reason doesn't mean that there's no cause and effect in the world. There is. And that cause and effect is karma. So Four Noble Truths, the three marks, and karma are right view. Right intention is to renounce the cause of suffering, which is clinging and confusion, ill will, the harming yourself and others. That is the right intention. The wrong intention is to take revenge while seeking happiness. Shantideva, the Indian epic poet, wrote The Way of the Bodhisattva. He said, we hate suffering, but we love its causes. So right intention tries to turn that around. And then the largest section of the Eightfold Path is the next one, ethics, which again, some Westerners seem to rebel against the idea that there's ethics and morality. But it actually takes 4 of the Eightfold Path are under ethics. Right speech is refraining from lying, divisive speech, abusive speech, and idle chatter. So you could say wrong speech is lying, dividing people, abusing people, and wasting time just chattering meaninglessly. That's wrong speech. Right speech is to refrain from those. And we can probably all think of examples of when that kind of speech has hurt ourselves and others. Right action includes, wrong action is killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. Right action is refraining from killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. Right livelihood is actually one of the 8. Everybody thinks Buddhism is meditation, but meditation gets 2, mindfulness and Samadhi. But right livelihood is actually one of the 8. And it's to refrain from trading in weapons, living beings, meat, intoxicants, and poison. Basically, right livelihood is an honest livelihood that avoids at least those things. And I would say interpreted broadly, the way Thich Nhat Hanh interprets the precepts. So intoxication doesn't just mean alcohol and drugs. It also means, consuming harmful movies or things like that. And then right effort is the last of the actions. Sometimes that's put under meditation, but I think right effort applies at least as much in daily life. We have to abandon the unskillful and the unwholesome, and we have to cultivate the wholesome. If we don't make that effort, then knowing all these things makes no difference. We actually have to make the effort. We have to be able to tell the difference between the wholesome or skillful and the unskillful. And then the third section of the Eightfold Path is meditation, Samadhi, meditation. Samadhi is often translated as concentration. It is not. Meditation is, maybe attention. Samadhi maybe be translated best as attention. That's not quite right either. So there's 2 sections under this. One is Samadhi itself, which I'll explain in a second. The first one is right mindfulness, sati in Pali. Mindfulness sati literally means remembering, and the Hindus used it. The teachers that the Buddha went to first were Hindu teachers, and they taught him concentration, meditation, and remembering. And he changed the meaning of it. He kept the word sati. It literally means to recall or remember. So mindfulness, the way we use it nowadays, is definitely incomplete. We think it just means we know what's going on around us, we're aware. But sati, mindfulness, remembering, actually has 3 parts. One is that you remember, you have chosen, you have an intention, say, to place your awareness on the breath. Sati remembers what that object is, doesn't just change objects when you get distracted. Remembering is coming back to the chosen object. It also means that you clearly comprehend what's going on, not just with the breath, but that if your house burns down, it catches on fire, or sounds come and go, you are aware of those too. You are clearly comprehending what's around you and what's arising inside you. And then the third piece that sati, mindfulness, has to include is wise attention. So when you get distracted from the breath, you know that you're distracted and you know what the proper response is. It's to return to the breath. If you're dull in meditation, you know the proper response is to move, shake it off, raise some energy, pay closer attention to bring you out of dullness. If your mind is distracted and busy, you know that the proper response is to calm down, ground yourself, return to the object, and relax. So mindfulness has to include remembering your object, clearly comprehending everything that's inside and outside you, and knowing how to respond to what arises. That's actual sati. And then samadhi. Sam means to bring together. So it literally means stability, stable attention, non-reactive attention. It's a unified mind that's not scattered, it's not dull, it's not busy. It's unified with the breath, unified with what's arising internally. Concentration is one way to cultivate stability. But samadhi is the stability, not the concentration. There are other ways, and we'll cover those next week. Samadhi is a unified, integrated, stable, clear attention. It's more than mindfulness. It's mindfulness that's taking care of the hindrances and the dullness and the busyness and the doubt. Samadhi is when your attention is, you place it, it stays where you put it. You know how to make little adjustments, but it doesn't move much. Samadhi is when your mindfulness has paid off and your attention is stable. So think of samadhi as stable attention, or just call it samadhi. And if you see the translation concentration, get really wound up about it, because concentration is actually ekagata, one-pointedness. The English word for, or the Sanskrit word for concentration should be ekagata, or jhana. Jhana is the jhanas, the 8 jhanas are levels of deepening concentration. So those could be called concentration, and ekagata, eka is one and gata is pointed. Ekagata or jhana could be concentration, but not samadhi. I hammer on this because one of the most common things of people I talk to is they don't know when they're mindful, or they can't figure out how to settle their mind. They're either dull all the time or they're busy all the time. They really have not learned the difference, and they haven't learned effective ways of stabilizing attention. And so they're always filled with doubt, or the practice is off and on, etc. I'm not claiming any special powers, because one of the reasons I hammer on this is because it's my problem too. I love to focus. I have a proclivity for focusing, and I had to let that go. I had to find a different way because my attention was too tight and there was too much effort. Just getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. I'm conscious of the time, but another word that is, yeah, I was going to cover these next week, but I'll just bring up one more word here in as an aspect of meditation. Shamata. Those of you from Dekaling, Lama Lekshi often uses the word shamatha. Shamata is sometimes translated as concentration. Oops. It's also translated sometimes as tranquility or calm. Oops. Shamata means even, like smooth. But mostly it means abiding. So sometimes it's translated as calm, abiding, but people latch onto the calm because that calm feels good, especially if your mind is busy all the time. But Sha doesn't really mean calm. Certainly doesn't mean tranquility. Sha means even, smooth, like a tabletop. So evenly abiding is actually a more accurate English. And the defining characteristic of shamatha, of evenly abiding, is not a focus or stability or concentration. The defining characteristic is flexible, open ease. So we know from meditating that our minds are often not calm, not silent, not peaceful. That doesn't mean you're not practicing shamatha. Shamatha is the ability to have an open, flexible mind that can take with ease whatever experience arises. So your mind can be still or busy. You can be calm or upset. Your mind can be wise or confused. If you're abiding evenly in that experience, then you're practicing shamatha. So another reason why when we sit with the breath, to try to make yourself calm, to try to empty your mind, to try to find peace or produce a certain experience, not only it doesn't work, but it kind of defeats you. It's self-defeating. The way to evenly abide in whatever arises is to learn how to abide in the experience instead of trying to change the experience. Why is shamatha important? Why is evenly abiding important? Because until we can evenly abide in what arises, we can't actually look at it and see what it is, see the actual nature of it. We cannot do vipassana without evenly abiding, have some sense of a base from which to examine and clearly see our experience. That's why I get wound up about it. And in fact, the concentration, while it's useful, it's one method, it can lead to evenly abiding. But the deeper levels of concentration, you have to come out of them anyway in order to do vipassana or insight meditation. You do it for a while until your mind is calm and clear and stable. You come out of that deep level of concentration in order to look around at your experience. So let's take a little break. Let's take a 5-minute break. I've thrown a lot of words at you. Take a 5-minute break, move around, please, because we can't really learn when we're sitting still all the time. Get tea or water and come back in about 5 minutes. So let's do a little contemplation. Contemplation is kind of halfway between studying and meditating, what we usually think of as meditating. Contemplation uses the thoughts and thinking, intentional thinking of study, but it's also using the direct awareness and insight of meditation. So like meditation, it helps if you do contemplation while keeping some awareness on the breath or in your body, aware of what's going on while you're doing your intentional thinking. You're using thought as if it were one of the five senses, and actually the Buddha made the mind the sixth sense, because we can do it in a deliberate and grounded way that reveals the actual nature of things to us, not just in a conceptual way, but in an actual direct seen way. Vipassana means a clear seen, direct seen, superior seen. And even though it uses the word, seen, it's like seen in that when you see your best friend come walking down the street, you don't have to think or reason or infer or deduce whether that's your friend. You see them and you know, but you can also know through the sense of smell if there's a fire. So contemplation should bring you to direct seeing. It may be unstable and very temporary, but so let's do an exercise. If you recall the Four Noble Truths, that dissatisfaction arises, its cause is craving and confusion. Connect with your experience of dissatisfaction. You don't have to bring up the most painful thing you've ever experienced, but recall an experience of dissatisfaction. Maybe you can even notice in real time some sense of dissatisfaction. It's late at night, you're not comfortable, you don't like the tone of my voice. Just connect with a sense of dissatisfaction, large or small. And recognize that that dissatisfaction is, it's arising, it's in your experience. But it does arise in your experience. That is the first noble truth. Dukkha arises. There is dukkha. And can you turn your attention to the second truth, which is that the cause of dissatisfaction, of dukkha, is craving, confusion, hatred, jealousy, pride, etc. Can you see that directly? In the case of your own dissatisfactions, can you see how the origin arises? Or how the experience of craving and confusion cause dissatisfaction to arise? This is way before the Eightfold Path or any kind of antidote or virtue, cultivating a virtue. It's to see the suffering, the dissatisfaction, and the origin of it, and to accept as true what those are. If you can connect with your experience of dukkha, and you can begin to glimpse the actual origin of it, then you have a chance to consider whether it can come to an end and how that might happen. But you won't consider an end to it or the method, the path for getting to the end, unless you actually experience that dukkha as dukkha and the origin for what it actually is. So because I made all the introductory remarks about the traditions and the maps and all that, we don't have as much time for contemplation as we'll have it in the second, third, and fourth. So let's turn to discussion, a contemplative discussion where we relate our own experience. You can reveal as little or as much as you like. Just do it, in a few comments, so that we have 16 of us. Everybody gets a chance, and if there's some silence in between people's comments or questions, that's okay. You can unmute yourself. You can also, you have, is it captions? No, it's reactions. You can, if you click on the reactions at the bottom, you can raise your virtual hand. But you can also just unmute yourself if no one else is speaking. And just share your view or your experience of dukkha and the origin of dukkha. And you can ask a question. I might answer it, or I might turn it over to the group. The beauty of Sangha is that with 16 of us here, there'll be 16 different views. And I'll bet most of them are spot on, from a different angle. So let's just have a kind of a slow motion contemplative discussion and see where it goes.
I guess I'll jump in. I was kind of having trouble connecting with my sense of dissatisfaction. And then I was kind of feeling frustrated by that. And then I was like, oh, well, this is it right here. So I sat with that. And I guess like seeing into its source would have to do with some sort of like wanting it, just like a wanting to understand without even really knowing what I was trying to understand. But I didn't like see any, I guess that's as deep as I got into it. Like I didn't see necessarily like an obvious way to an end of that. But yeah, that's just kind of what happened for me.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Your realization that the dissatisfaction that you couldn't find was actually the dissatisfaction reminds me of Mara. They personalized the confusion and the reactions as Mara, who can appear as anything, sometimes as something beautiful or seductive or something scary. Mara can appear as anything. And that is that itself, the origin is our confusion, our not seeing what's actually there or not appreciating it. And suffering can be very subtle and still be dissatisfaction. It can lead to all sorts of things. This is how dukkha can be very subtle.
Hi, well, I can try this. It was very easy for me to locate a dissatisfaction. And what I came up with was, oh, I have no control over this. I don't know if that's what you're asking, but that's what it led me to. Like the tendril went to that. Oh yeah, I cannot control this.
Does anyone else have dissatisfaction with their lack of control?
Can you hear me? I had never just sat and observed dissatisfaction arising, so I felt a little frustrated because I hadn't. But then I thought, well, when I get up in the morning, and if there were no coffee, I would definitely be able to feel that arising, and I might be more aware of that.
Yeah, Chris and I both have the confusion that says coffee will make us happy. I have that almost every morning. And I didn't used to drink coffee. I used to drink green tea. And then if I didn't have green tea, I would be unhappy. So my delusion has shifted from object to object over the years. But there's always something that if I just had it, I'd be happy.
I initially was, trying to think up a really nice, obvious, powerful dissatisfaction, and then quickly realized that all I have to do is notice an itch or a slight discomfort, and sort of a longing to scratch it or, adjust my clothing or, and I intellectually know or have learned through sitting that if I can just observe that and abide through it, that it sort of becomes fascinating to then after a while observe that sure enough it was impermanent. So that's a really, really small thing, but it's so easy to get caught up in your dissatisfactions and feel the urge to react, which I think is kind of a sense of control or the illusion of control.
Yeah, next week one thing we'll look at is the 12 links of dependent arising, which is how experience actually arises. It's broken down into 12 very brief moments. So an instant of experience arises. We break it into the parts. One thing leads to another.
Mm-hmm.
Wanting, not wanting, or just being befuddled leads to impulse. And impulse leads to action. And if we act, we will get the results of any action, for better or worse. What usually happens is we have that little discomfort, physical, mental, emotional, and then immediately we have the impulse and we move into action. And the more subtle it is, I'm just slightly uncomfortable. The more subtle it is, the easier it is for that impulse to pop up and move into action. I don't know who was first, but Eddie or Julie, either of you. Please go ahead.
I think when you, oh, go ahead, Eddie. When you mentioned that we need to move, I thought, yes, because when we sat down, I wanted to continue to move. I've been sitting a lot today, and so my dissatisfaction was coming back to sit and be still physically. Yeah, so felt a little rebellious there.
Yeah, the truth is the human nervous system is not made to sit still. And so another side effect of concentration is the holding still. It usually raises tension and actually destabilizes a little bit if it's not done skillfully. The impulse, if there's something we want we grasp at it. If there's something we don't want, we push it away. That's kind of a fight or flee. But the third reaction that our nervous system has is to freeze. So our nervous system actually associates holding still, freezing, as a anxiety, response to some fear. So part of meditation is learning how and when to move, not to do it impulsively or habitually, but to learn that sometimes the fastest way to ease and stillness is to go ahead and move and take care of the nervous system. Holding still doesn't usually help.
Eddie, were you trying to talk at one point? Because I saw your picture and I just couldn't hear you.
Oh, I was letting you go first.
Oh, it's okay.
I thought of something, but it was big because I've retired, but when I was at work, we had a very unsupportive manager for a number of years. And at the first few years, I was just so angry. And everybody else was so angry. And it took me a very long time to look at it as in a different way. This was how it was, and I needed to come to terms with it within. And after a few years, once I did that, it was rather peaceful going to work, and it was interesting watching other people go through what I did and realizing they had their own path with it, and just listening and saying, yeah, but you got to let that go. Anyways, it was a huge, huge learning experience with that.
I think being often an aversive type myself, I'm often anxious to let go of something. It always is something I don't like. That's what I want to let go of. And part of me fears that if I don't let go of it, or maybe if I do let go of it, if I just let go of it in the sense of ignoring, if I don't feel the aversion and I just let go of it, then that boss or my habit or whatever it is, the city I live in, whatever's irritating me is just going to keep going and make a mess of me. But your story shows how when the letting go comes after experiencing completely and seeing what the origin or the contributing factors that you bring to some experience of dissatisfaction. The bad boss was still a bad boss. What you let go of was your aversion, and probably saw more clearly and better able to respond to the bad boss. when you weren't clouded or impulsive from the aversion. So I really relate to that. Thank you.
Can I jump in?
Please do, Richard.
Can you
Nice
hear
to
me?
see you. Yes,
Hey, nice to see you, George. Yeah.
it's been a long time.
Yeah. So I had a kind of interesting experience. Last night I went to see this music show. And it was phenomenal. It was one of the finer shows I've seen in a long time. And I just was like really caught up in how free these musicians were, like with their not just with their chops, their craft, but with their non-egoic, non-self-conscious sharing. And the whole place was just alive, with this music. And I just was like, I want to be freer. So like I was thinking, I want to have have that kind of looseness or freedom. And I was aware of thinking that, and it would go away. Actually, I'd get involved in the music, it'd go away, but I kept coming back, especially with a couple of the players in this quintet. And I was like, what is it? Is like garden variety jealousy that's happening here or something, it's just some longing to be other than what I am, I guess, or something. And it kind of stuck with me today, that sense of like, hey, I want to loosen up here. I want to change my life and get looser, something. So I don't know if this is apropos to what we're talking about, but I think it's just, I don't know if, under big categories of what to label it. I suppose it's, I can't, jealousy, maybe it wasn't really envy quite, but there was something along those lines of feeling inadequate myself, that I wasn't, free or something. But that's all.
Yeah, that's spot on. For the purposes of the Four Noble Truths, it really doesn't matter whether the dissatisfaction appears to be subtle or really gross and overwhelming. It doesn't matter whether it's aversion, longing, a sense of confinement, a sense of craving, a sense of dullness, or what the heck is going on around here. All of those are different versions of dukkha. Some of them come from specific reactive patterns. So jealousy, has a certain, it produces a certain flavor of dukkha. Pride produces a little different flavor. Hatred has its own flavor. The result, our experience when we are full of hatred, has a little different experience. It can be subtle, or it can be really intense. But all of you have brought up, with whatever flavor of dukkha you can recall or experience tonight, have brought up in a way that shows that if we stay in touch with the dukkha, if we can actually open to it and explore it and taste it, we'll at least come to know the nature of it. Is this jealousy, or is this hatred? Is this longing, or is this dullness or busyness, some kind of confusion? And if we know the nature of the dukkha, we're that much closer to seeing the origin of it. And that's the point of sticking with the Four Noble Truths, not to just look at them and say, yeah, that makes sense. And then you never look at them again. You just focus on the breath or whatever. We have to stay in touch with dukkha, with that first noble truth. And the Eightfold Path and the practices and the results and all the rest are nowhere to be found if we don't stay in touch with the dukkha. Dukkha is not constant. It doesn't mean like life's a bummer and always will be and always has been. And, you know, we live in the human realm. So we do have pleasures. We do have relief. We do have sublime experiences. We do have moments or periods of peace and contentment. But dukkha is always a kind of lingering. It's somewhere often outside of our awareness. And the impulses arise because of that dukkha. And we set the seeds of future dissatisfaction in place. So when somebody comes to me that wants to learn how to meditate, they're often focused on technique. How do I do it? How do I make it successful? How do I know I'm doing it? But I do the best I can to bring them back to the first noble truth. Why do you want to meditate? Where does the desire to meditate come from? Does it feel like there will be freedom, either from an itch, constant itching, or a constant sense of confinement or inadequacy? Does it feel like there will be peace? You know, what is the dukkha that you want to meditate to? What is your motivation? It's actually much more important than technique. There's many techniques. There will be multiple techniques that you can use. But if you don't know what to use them on or with, even if you master concentration or insight or even loving kindness, whatever it is, it likely won't free you from the particular dukkhas that you haven't experienced and understood. I appreciate everybody sharing, and as we go along, I'll do my best not to necessarily respond to each of you. I'd be perfectly willing to, but there are more people. You know, I don't want to spend the whole time talking. I'm going to talk less in the future classes because we've taken care of some of the logistics and things tonight. But clearly, everything that people have said is completely relevant. And so often we can get more from each other than we can from a teacher who naturally just sees things from their own point of view, which is what we're all doing. So I just love the Buddha Dharma, and I've been studying it long enough that I'm just all the more fascinated and kind of filled with a lot of facts and things. And so sometimes that it's not so helpful as far as contemplation and discussion. So thank you, everyone. I do want to start on time and end on time. These classes were supposed to end at 8:30, which is 11:30 at Chris Walter's house. And even here on the West Coast, some go to work and etc. So I want to end at 8:30, but let's spend these last few minutes sitting again in a comfortable posture. No need for perfect meditation, but just touching back in with any sense of dissatisfaction, touching into any sense of having had a little bit of insight into the nature of it and the origin of it. And recalling your motivation that brought you to the Buddhist path. So let's just spend about 5 minutes opening to whatever our experience is. May all beings come to know the nature of their suffering and the origin of it, and may they come to find the path to its cessation. Thank you all for putting in the time and effort. Let's dedicate our merit to the benefit of all beings, as well as ourselves. And I will see you next week, I hope.
Thank you, George. This was great.
You're most welcome. Thank you for coming.
George.
Thank you.
Thank
Take-
you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.